I'd like to welcome our speaker today, KCH Director of Grief Programs, Dr. Iman Williams Christians. Prior to coming to Kansas City Hospice, Dr. Iman served as a Chief Clinical Officer at Lost and Found Grief Center in Springfield, which has a similar model to the Kansas City Hospice Solace House Center for Grief and Healing. She's a clinical psychologist with over 12 years of experience. She earned her PhD from Jackson State University. Dr. Iman completed a postdoctoral fellowship with StrongStar, which is the world's largest research consortium for the detection, prevention, and treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder related to military combat trauma. She is trained in 3 trauma therapies, including cognitive processing therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, and certified in prolonged exposure. She's also a prolonged exposure consultant with Emory University. And previously, Dr. Iman served as the clinic director for the Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic at Endeavors in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and Killeen, Texas. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Iman and hand it over to her for today's presentation.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am so excited to be here with you today. So just to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to be covering, I am going to be covering our services, the services that we offer at Kansas City Hospice, including Solace House. But I can't help but spend a little time just talking about grief theory and why we approach grief in this way, and getting into some of the history and a little bit of grief education thrown in there as well. So thank you all for being here. All right, and sprinkled in, I do have some quotes or things that I found that I use when I am in practice and working with those who are grieving. So this first one is: grief, I say, come in, sit down. I have tea, there is honey. This will take as long as it takes. Just setting the expectation that grief takes as long as it takes, and we can't rush it. We can't will it away. It is something that we have to deal with, we have to speak about, we have to work through, we have to process, and there's nothing we can do to speed that process. All right, so I thought it'd be good to just, clarify our definitions a little bit. So I typically use the term grief, and grief really means the response to any type of loss. So this can be the loss of a person. That's typically what we are dealing with at Kansas City Hospice, but it could also be the death of a pet. It could be a loss because of a divorce. It could be a job loss and everything that can come with it. So grief is kind of all encompassing, whereas bereavement, on the other hand, we're really talking about the death of a loved one. Typically, I use them pretty interchangeably, but it's just good to know the differences. And then mourning is the act of grieving. So it's that outward expression. So, at a funeral, you'll see people crying, or you'll see different ways that they're expressing their grief, or, maybe at a memorial service, they're doing something to honor that person. Maybe it's a balloon release or something like that. So that is what mourning is. So I like to talk about, there are 2 camps when it comes to grief. There are those who believe that grief is a normal, natural reaction, something that should not be pathologized. It should not be diagnosed. This is just something that all of us humans go through and have to go through. And then I would say the other camp is more about, well, if we do diagnose these things, then we can get reimbursement for services. And they're highly aware that there are some who this is not a normal natural reaction. It's something that's going on for a long time and affecting many areas in their life. And so they're really into making sure that the criteria is set. I saw earlier today there was a seminar on prolonged grief disorder. So those who are in that camp or in that second camp, I'm kind of I don't take a side on any of that. I think we can all get along and learn from each other. I will say at Solace House, which is our program for children and families, we do talk about grief being a normal and natural reaction, and just kind of normalizing it for the families. Yes, everything you're going through, there are other families right behind you that are going through the same thing. It is helpful to sometimes give analogies when you're talking about grief, and people really tend to respond to those. And so I've put two here that I think I get the most response from, that grief is like an open wound. With great care, it will eventually heal, but there will always be a scar. The other is to compare it to a fierce storm at sea. So there are waves that are peaked and close together. Um, and there are times when it's going to be calmer and you feel like, oh, I can regroup, I can breathe now. And you never know when, I call it a grief wave. You never know when that grief wave is coming. I also talk a little bit about, it's not just that you've lost this person that you love so dearly. You're also losing these experiences that you'd hope to have. You're losing, maybe your father walking you down the aisle, or your parents coming to your high school graduation. Um, and sometimes what will happen at Solace House is we'll work with a family, we'll work with a child for a year or two, and they leave and kind of go on with their life, and then they'll come back. They'll ask if they can come back. Something has happened, and I really wish, my parent was here to go through that. I'm reflecting on, there was a teen group that I was in, and the other facilitator was talking to a teen, and he said, I really would like to talk about asking this girl out to prom. And both of us are kind of tensing up, like, oh, where's this conversation going? But as he got into it more, he said, this is a conversation I would be having with my dad, and my dad is not here. And is it okay if we have this conversation right now? And so that's absolutely a space where that person could share that. It's good to know that there are different grieving styles. These are the two typically used. Not to say that you have to fall into one or the other. Some people are in both. They see a mixture of themselves in both. So we have the intuitive griever. This is an emotional griever. They have that outward mirroring of their inner feelings. So you're seeing more outwards expression of grief. That morning I was talking about. They share their feelings. They typically need to slow down to grieve. The way you can help this person is by listening to them, connecting, sharing, allowing them to explore their feelings, allowing them to have that emotional experience. And then you have those instrumental grievers. So these are the ones who are very much in their heads, thinking about the next thing, so the next task, the next project. These are the people who are planning the funeral and planning all the logistics of, maybe we need to sell the house and sell the furniture. And what is helpful to them is to, restore their normal activities and routines. So they're right back at work. They're trying to solve problems. What helps them is practical information, exploration of changes, keeping them busy. Yes, they take an active role in the memorialization process. So typically when a family comes to me and they say, I just don't know if, my child is grieving normally, or, maybe my spouse is, they're not showing any kind, that they're struggling at all. And it could be that, they're kind of shutting down their feelings. It could be that. But what I find more is they're an instrumental griever. And this is how they are working through their grief. So this is a quote from Hope Edelman. Hope Edelman is famous in the grief world. She lost her mother at a very young age and has written several books. Her most famous one is called Motherless Daughters. And she just details what she went through as a child and what she's learned in the grief world. So she wrote, when my mother died, a lot of people tried to comfort me by saying, well, you still have your father, you still have a brother and a sister, you have a wonderful husband and beautiful children. And you know what? That's all true. That's all completely true. But I still don't have my mother. I think this really brings home that, we love, we're trying to show love and care and affection to a person who is grieving. And so we're just trying to grasp anything. And sometimes we can say things that are hurtful, like, well, at least you have more children, or, at least you have this other parent. But that can be really hurtful to a person who is grieving. They just need you to listen to them. They just need you to be there, to be that comfort for them. So we have to be real careful about platitudes that we might offer. So there are several theories on grief. As with almost anything in psychology, one of the first theories has to do with Sigmund Freud. He was just one of the first to really put on paper what was going on in the brain and the mind. And so his was grief work theory. He really focused on breaking ties with those who had died. And this idea that, if you don't break ties, then there's some kind of pathology, there's something wrong with you. So that was one of the first working theories. Kubler-Ross theory is probably the most famous, the stages of grief. You've probably heard of them. Starts with denial, anger, and goes all the way to acceptance. Kubler-Ross will say herself that this theory was based on the stages of death, not the stages of grief. But for some reason, it was used for grief. And that's not ever what she intended. Hope Edelman, who I was just talking about, she lost her mother to cancer, and a social worker gave her a pamphlet that had these stages. And she was going through it going, yes, check. I've gone through denial, check. I'm gone through anger. And she was like, oh, okay, I'm done now. I don't need to do any more processing. What we've learned since then is you're going to go through, yes, all of these emotions. You're going to go through them again and again, and maybe not in any sort of order, or maybe you skip some. And so everybody's experience is different. It amazes me that this is continuing to be taught in schools. It was taught at my university. And I remember sitting with my first grieving client's family, and just the horrific way that her brother died. And we went through this, and I very quickly was like, okay, this is not working. So that's Kubler-Ross's theory. It's not a bad one. It's just, I would say it's incomplete is what I would say. And then there's the dual process model. This is used a lot more, definitely in our program, we use it. And it's just talking about, we oscillate between two modes, loss orientation and restoration orientation. So this is what it looks like. You will see that loss orientation and restoration orientation are very similar, excuse me, to the grieving styles that I mentioned earlier. So intuitive grieving, loss oriented, and restoration oriented, looking very much like instrumental grieving. But you're oscillating back and forth between these two is what this model is saying. And you're thinking about grief at one point, and you're having new experiences at the next. And this is really illustrated very well when we are working with children who are grieving. At one moment they'll present to us crying as, struggling to talk about this person that they've lost. And then 5 minutes later, they'll, go to the dollhouse and they'll start playing as if that didn't happen. And it's because our brain needs to take a break from that grief, from that active outward expression of grief to something. We're still processing our grief. Like you'll see the themes as that person is using that dollhouse. You'll still see those themes that they're working through it, but it's giving their brain a break. And then I would say, at Kansas City Hospice, the grief department, word for tasks is what we use the most. I really like this theory because of the last task, which is that enduring connection. So it starts with accepting the reality of the loss, processing the pain and grief, adjusting to a world without that person, and then getting to that enduring connection. So we are not, in the first theory with Sigmund Freud, we are not breaking ties. We are not forgetting that this person ever existed. We are finding and discovering a new relationship with this person that we love so much. So a great example, I have a friend who lost his father. And they would always talk about tools, and he had fond memories of going to a home improvement store. And so without his father, he goes into Lowe's or, another place like that. And he'll be going down the wood aisle and he'll start having a conversation with his father, like imagining what, his father would be saying about the task that he was doing. And so that's him engaging in this enduring connection. Whenever you have a memorial for the anniversary every year, whether it's releasing balloons or, making t-shirts or, whatever it is, that is you making that enduring connection. Grief is like a roller coaster. Some days we feel up and other days we feel down. I would add to this and say, sometimes you feel like, man, I got this roller coaster thing. And then sometimes you're like, why the heck did I get on this thing? It's going way too fast. And that's what can happen with grief sometimes. We think we've got it all under control, we've mastered it, and then something mundane will happen and it'll bring it all rushing back. I'm reflecting on, I went to Silver Dollar City in Branson, Missouri, and my daughter, who was 5 at the time, she wanted to get on a roller coaster, and I was like, oh, I don't know. But she's unusually tall, so she can get on all of the adult rides. And so there was one that kind of seesaws back and forth. And I was like, all right, when we get up there, if you get scared, just close your eyes, hold my hand. I'm right next to you. It'll be okay. So we both get up there. And I love roller coasters. They're so much fun to me. So we get going and she's just screaming in delight. She's so happy. And I'm like, what the heck is this? I'm going to die. This is horrible. I thought I liked roller coasters and now I just want to get off. And so all this to say that grief can sneak up on you sometimes, and sometimes it's not quite what you expected. All right. So I'm going to get into a little bit of our Kansas City Hospice grief programs. And I'm the new director of grief programs, so I've been on since October of last year. So when I first came on, we had, I would say, 3 sections: hospice grief support, Solace House, and passages, which is like our counseling program. And since I've taken over, I've consolidated passages to fall under Solace House. So if you're familiar with our programs, this looks a little bit different. So under our hospice grief support program, these are those who are going through our patient care. They're going through our programs. They're using Medicare or whatever their insurance is. Once that patient dies on our service, the family is entitled to 13 months of grief support. And that can look a lot of different ways. But I would categorize them traditionally between 2 groups: individual services and group services. Our individual support, we're calling them, we're meeting them in person, whatever it is, and giving them that grief support, that grief education, helping them navigate different things that are going on. And then we have our group services, and we have a whole list of things that we're doing for the fall. We've discovered, even with COVID, we can do very effective work on the phone or virtually, as we're doing now. So that hasn't stopped us from doing great work for our clients. And then we have Solace House. So Solace House is traditionally for our children and families. We also work with adults. So Solace House is in Prairie Village, Kansas, the physical building, but we serve the whole city. So we have our group services. That's what we're probably known for the most. We also have our camps. So we just completed Camp Erin. We also have Camp Carousel coming up soon. And then we have our individual services. So I talked about passages counseling a little bit. So these are licensed social workers that are providing counseling. And then something that's new is called our New Hope program, and I'll get into that in just a second. So we have I'm going to talk first about our hospice grief support team and our expressive therapists. So we have 5 full-time grief support specialists. They're the ones making the initial calls and providing the support. They are a wonderful, wonderful, compassionate, caring team. I love working with them. We have 1 part-time bilingual grief support specialist, and she speaks Spanish. And then we have a full-time music therapist, Jessie Howman. She serves both on the hospice side and some in our grief work as well. She'll come to camp, she'll help us with the group. But she also works on the what I call the patient care side. So as the patient is on hospice, maybe they can't speak anymore, but their ears are working just fine, and they are responding very well to music. And so that's when they'll call Jessie in, and she does incredible work. Our grief support team averages a caseload of about 3,500. So quite a few people throughout the year that come through these programs. So I mentioned that we follow them for 13 months. We call them, we offer them support, individual support. We provide workshops and support groups. And by the way, those aren't just for our hospice families, they are also for the community, and they're free. We also provide newsletters. We try to do that quarterly. We train other professionals Deb Wilson does a wonderful job of training our fellows once a year when they come through. So just different trainings that we offer or when we're asked. So there is that. So we have our grief support groups. These are the ones that we are offering this fall. So if any of these sound like they would be of interest to us, you can go on our website and request to join one of these groups. Navigating Grief is one that we offer, I think, every other month. It's a short kind of one-time thing. You get some grief education, kind of like what I was talking about earlier in the presentation. We have our grief journey, which is 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks, where you get to be around other grievers and do some processing along with getting some grief education. Music Speaks is brand new. Jesse Howman will be doing that. I think Deb Wilson will also be. So basically we're combining music with grief education. So I'm excited to see how that group does. Our men's group is wonderful as well. Eric Sigler does that group. Sorting Through. So this group actually came as an idea. One of our grief support specialists noticed that we had clients who were struggling to, should I donate these clothes of my loved one? Should I throw them out? What should I do? And so a group was created to kind of talk about these issues and work through it together. Excuse me. And then we have our Nurturing Your Grief in Nature. So this is using the natural beauty around us and using that to explore grief. So this is a new one that's being done by Joel Karmer. Really excited to see how that goes. He does a wonderful job. He's also a chaplain, and he's just really great with words. So these are all the groups that we have going this fall. The only one I would say that is missing is our holiday workshops. So I think we're going to have a couple of those where we're just really focusing on, how do we cope during the holidays when our loved ones are no longer here. All right, this is an example of our newsletter that I talked about that we try to get out quarterly. Just some good tips on, what to expect in grief. There are some people who don't take us up on services. They're perfectly fine getting these newsletters and, just knowing that we're there. So this is really who those are for. But we send them to all of our clients. We have Circle of Light. So we just completed this. We do it at the plaza. That's a real picture that we've used. You see the Luminaries, which is a white bag with a candle in it, and it's got the person's name on it. So when I talk about enduring connection, this is a great example of that. So you're gathering with other grievers, with your family. We do a short ceremony, and you just get to reflect and remember this person who was very special to you. And people come for years and years. So it's not a one-time deal at all. And it's free to the community. So you can request your luminary, and we're out there I believe it's the last Tuesday in May. Okay, so I'm going to get into Solace House. So Solace House is typically for children and families. We serve all of Kansas City. We serve them in groups, individual counseling, and in camps primarily. We do get requests to go to schools or different organizations and provide grief education. Lately, we've been getting a lot of requests to do crisis support. So maybe a child has died or a staff member has died, and the group is struggling and just wants some tips and things to kind of help them through. So we've been doing those. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. So I put this in here. The blue butterfly is the symbol of children's grief. There's Children's Grief Awareness Day or month that is in the month of November. And everyone wears blue, and that's a great time to just remember that children are grieving too, and their grief might look a little bit different than adults, but they need the same care that adults do. So our groups, this picture is actually from camp, but this is what a group would look like. Our groups typically, when you go into Solace House, is a very calming effect that happens. Everything is very intentional to make it very homey. And then you go into your group rooms. And so the group rooms are themed based on how the child developmentally is able to think about death. So our youngest group, for example, they go into the sky room and they think about, that their person is in the sky, or, there's rainbows in there. And so all of that is tied into the group work that we do. But they're sitting on bean bags, typically, or reading a story, something like that. And good thing to kind of note between the two programs is that those who are coming to Solace House are usually experiencing sudden death, whether through accident, suicide, homicide, all kinds of losses, but it's typically unexpected. It's at no cost. So we provide these groups free to the community. And we offer them in the fall and spring for sure. We added a summer session this year, and we may add a winter session depending on interest. Excuse me, I am getting over a cold. I apologize for that. So we have children's groups by age. And then we have other groups: partner loss, child loss, suicide loss. So depending on the type of death that the person is going through, that's how we group them. All right, so getting into our individual services. We have our Passages program. So Passages is they specialize in grief, they specialize in trauma, they're EMDR trained, and they specialize in loss. So loss can cover an array of things, but typically it's a life-altering illness, or it can be divorce. So it can be a lot of different things. These are licensed social workers. The biggest differentiator is that they do take insurance, which is a great benefit for those who have it, and they just have to worry about the copay. We also take self-pay. There's a sliding scale. There's a grant that funds Clay and Jackson County. So if you have a child who resides in those counties, there's the potential for you to get your counseling covered. Our New Hope program, so this is new, we haven't launched it yet, but these are, they specialize just in grief. So they're providing support for grief issues. There's many disciplines that go into this, including our interns. And so they provide these services at a reduced fee, so a lower fee than even our Passages program. The sliding scale is still in place, and of course, grant funds will be used if the person qualifies. All right, so Camp Erin, a little bit about our camps. So we just had Camp Erin in June. We had it at Unity Village. Just a beautiful, beautiful place. Camp Carousel will occur in September. Both of these camps are free to the community. We have grants that help support, and then just very caring donors who help make these two camps happen. So Camp Carousel will happen at Heartland Retreat in the Northland. So I have some pictures from camp that we just did. Last Saturday, I guess. They just had a wonderful, wonderful time. We have the yell box at the top left. And so this was an activity where the kids basically took a cereal box and they decorated it first with all of their emotions. And the idea is that, they would be able to yell these emotions into this box when they have them. And you see they have the characters from inside out. Just an example of identifying emotions and what to do with them once you have them. So that was a great activity. In the middle, so we have an opening and closing ceremony. And in the opening ceremony, they came up with the brilliant idea of asking the kids, they put a pile of rocks in the middle, and each age group would decide what to do with these rocks. So they didn't look like anything. And they came up with some really creative ideas. I think the youngest group came up with a cairn, which is a universal symbol of grief and hope from grief. And so basically you stack the rocks on top of each other and people use them to memorialize their loved ones. And I bet you those 6 and 7-year-olds don't know what a cairn is. I've never seen one, but they were able to come up with that. And it was really cool. One group came up with a campfire. That was cool. And our oldest group designed it in the shape of a heart. Which we had intended to do in the closing ceremony, and they just naturally did that. And so in the middle is a second heart, and these are the hearts that the children decorated to memorialize their loved ones. And so they get to take those rocks home. And there were certain rocks that they wrote like emotions and things that they wanted to leave behind. And so before we closed, they took those rocks. We made a ceremony of placing that rock in a rock garden and leaving it behind. And they got to take their memorial rocks home. So that was really cool. We had an alpaca, which the kids loved. Everybody loved the water balloons. They loved the parachute with the water balloons. So Camp Erin is a wonderful time. And I'm so glad we had, I think, close to 40 kids out there. So it was a great time. So we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it bigger for Camp Carousel. Camp Carousel is September 16th through the 18th. It will be at Heartland. This is different in that it is for families. So, the caretakers can bring their children and their house together. And also we are focusing on those who have experienced COVID-19 loss. So if you know of any families who would be interested in this, please contact us and we will get them enrolled. But I'm excited to see that launch. I wanted to leave you with just a few things. If you are grieving yourself or you have a friend who's grieving, just some practical things to keep in mind. So you want to engage your support system, first of all. You want to, and when you're engaging your support system, you want to think about, okay, who's the person who is the most affected by this loss? Because those aren't the people necessarily that you want to pour all of your feelings into. You want to move outside. So that's why on the left I have this circle. So you want to do that with people who are kind of on the outside of where you are. And you just want to pour in comfort to those who are closest to losing that special person. So engage your support system. Remember, grief is unique. Give yourself time. Definitely, this is not something that you can rush at all. Engage in positive self-talk. What I mean by that is it can be helpful, and it's easier to do this, I think, with a therapist, but you can do this yourself. You can find quotes online that are inspiring to you, that help get you going. You can pick music that does this. But what you're trying to do is to help shift your thinking, which may be very negative or just unhelpful, and you are intentionally placing things in your life that help get you going, that help get you out of the bed in the morning, that help you feel good when maybe everybody's kind of gone home from that initial swarm of people in the first month of a loss. So engage in positive self-talk. Talk to someone who's a good listener. There are people who will give lots of advice or who say things that are unhelpful. So you want to find someone who's there and who will listen to you and let you just go on and on about your person, because that's what you need and that's where the healing is going to happen. And to remember self-care. To be gentle with yourself, to not berate yourself because you're having a bad day, to remember that this takes time and that this is really hard. If you are a professional who is working in grief, or you encounter a client who is going through it, it's important to remember to set good boundaries for yourself, to engage in self-care, to not bring it home with you, to keep that life balance. I had a friend who said, on her way home, she would kind of just think about the day. And when she would cross the train tracks, that meant that it was time to shut all of that off. And it was time to just start thinking about the rest of her life and to leave that behind. And that's how you keep good boundaries for yourself. And to engage in the employee assistance program if you have one at work, or to find a good therapist. Volunteers, I thought I'd take a second to just say that we cannot do what we do without our wonderful volunteers. If you are interested in being a volunteer, please reach out to us. I put the link below, or the email below, that you can reach out to if you're interested in volunteering with any of our programs. We definitely need them. So just a little plug for that. I wanted to end with a lot of people feel that the way that you manage your grief, or that you kind of get to the other side of your grief, is by shrinking it. But instead, that grief is always going to be there. It doesn't leave you. It's just becomes more bearable, easier to carry. And so all of the things that I've talked about, whether it is self-care, whether it is finding that enduring connection, all of those things are how we grow around our grief. This is how we cope. This is how we manage our grief. And I find it very helpful to think about it in this way. We're not shrinking our grief, we're not burying it. We can't, but we can grow around it. And I'm going to leave you with a quote from Hope Edelman. It's impossible to undo 15 or 20 years of learned behavior with a mother in only a few months. If it takes 9 months to bring a life into this world, what makes us think we can let go of someone in less? All right, so that is the end of what I wanted to talk about today. So I'm open for questions or anything that you have for me. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Dr. Iman. That was a wonderful presentation. I love those final just thoughts you leave us with. Those are just very, very resonating.